Once upon a time, there were two friends, John and Jane, who grew up in the same town. They were inseparable, always discussing their dreams and aspirations. But as they grew older and started to build their careers, they chose different paths to success. John was a firm believer in the traditional route to success, and he followed the default path. He earned a prestigious degree, he landed a high-paying job at a well-known company, and he quickly climbed the corporate ladder. On paper, he had it all: a high salary, job security, and social status. However, deep down, John couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness and dissatisfaction that often kept him awake at night. Meanwhile, Jane chose the Pathless Path, a journey filled with twists and turns and uncertainty. Instead of sticking to the conventional route, she explored various career paths. She took on projects that resonated with her values, and she embraced a growth mindset. She became an entrepreneur, she started a social enterprise, and she even took some time off to travel and volunteer in underprivileged communities. Jane's career was anything but predictable, and she sometimes struggled financially. However, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment and purpose in her work, knowing that she was making a difference in the world and living life on her own terms. These two things, the default path and the pathless path, are two of the concepts that Paul Millerd contrasts in this book, The Pathless Path, imagining a story, a new story for work and life, which is the subject of this episode of Book Club, which is the ongoing series that we've been doing now for 3 years. The ongoing series where we distill and discuss some of my favorite highlights from my favorite books. Now, this was one of the most impactful books that I read last year, and it really gave me the terminology and a few mental models and almost permission to explore a non-traditional career path. And so if you've been feeling lost in your career or somewhat directionless in life and you're kind of thinking that that's a bad thing, then this might be an interesting book for you to read. Anyway, in this video, I want to talk about 10 of my favorite points from the book, the ones that most resonated with me, and I hope that some of this stuff will resonate with you as well. The first one is to appreciate the difference between the default path and the pathless path. So essentially the default path is that thing that we get told when we're younger, that like, hey, just go to a good school and get good grades. And when you get good grades, you'll be able to go to good college or university, and then you'll apply for a good job, and then you'll get a nice job at a nice paying job, and you'll climb the corporate ladder, and eventually you'll be happy. Whereas in contrast to that, we have what Paul Millerd calls the pathless path. He writes that the pathless path is an alternative to the default path. It is an embrace of uncertainty and discomfort. It's a call to adventure in a world that tells us to conform. For me, it's also a gentle reminder to laugh when things feel out of control and trusting that an uncertain future is not a problem to be solved. Now, I love the terminology here, this idea of default path versus pathless path, and it really kind of helped me in my own life, because when I took a break from the traditional default path of medicine to embrace this like more pathless path of being an internet entrepreneur, YouTuber-y type thing, I was always kind of racked with a sense of like uncertainty, that like, I don't really know what my life is going to look like. And I'd have conversations with my mom where she'd be like, what's your plan, son? And I'd be like, honestly, I don't know. And she'd be like, there's a lot of uncertainty in this kind of entrepreneurial career path. And every entrepreneur and creator and author even that I've ever spoken to on my podcast or in real life has vibed with this idea of uncertainty when you're doing your own thing. And what I like about Paul Millard's book is that it really explores where this fear of uncertainty comes from. And even just having that terminology that's saying that like, hey, the default path is certain, where you kind of know what you're doing, you know what corporate career you're on, whatever field that might be in, is actually very different to the pathless path, where you're trying to embrace uncertainty as much as you can. Now, speaking of uncertainty, the next point that really resonated with me is the idea of the certainty trap. And that's this idea that often we will suffer through kind of not really enjoying our jobs or not enjoying the thing that we're doing, but we'll trade that lack of enjoyment for some amount of certainty. Like, I don't enjoy the job that much, but at least I know that I'm going to be in this place for the next 12 months. We often value certainty and security over potentially following our dreams and doing the thing that most resonates with us. Now, obviously, if you have a family to support and you've got dependents and you've got people relying on you, there is an extent to which you have to go for that. You have to optimize for security and certainty because you've got a mortgage and bills and a family. But if you're like me or most young people that I speak to and you don't really have dependents who are depending on you financially, then in that context, our default behavior still seems to be, for a lot of us, to default to the default path. And what Paul even says in the book is that with so many options out there, with all these options that we have, with all the different careers that we could do, it can be tempting to pick a path that offers certainty rather than doing the harder work of figuring out what we really want. Now, the other thing that we could want rather than certainty is prestige. And that brings us to point number 3, which is the prestige trap. Prestige, broadly defined as the attention that you get when you do things that other people see as impressive. And often when we're deciding what to do with our careers, we default to the thing that is more prestigious. And there's a nice quote from Paul Graham, who's the founder of Y Combinator, which is a startup incubator. He says that prestige is a powerful magnet that warps even your beliefs about what you enjoy. And this is so true. Like, I've experienced this, all my friends have experienced this. When you're in a prestigious career, it's very easy to convince yourself that you're actually enjoying the thing, but what you're actually enjoying is the social status, the accolades, the admiration, the fact that when you tell your aunt at that party what you do for a living, she says, oh, that's interesting, isn't it? Whereas the people who are more on this pathless path, like I would struggle to explain what I do for a living. I used to be a doctor, and then I disappointed my mum when I became a YouTuber. Most of my friends who are entrepreneurs would struggle to explain what they do for a living. And these days, in fairness, the whole like entrepreneurship startup thing has become a bit glamorized to the point that there is some amount of like old world prestige associated with being an entrepreneur. But like the point is, prestige is a trap. And one of the things I took away from the book is that whenever I'm making a decision that happens to also be in line with prestige, I need to be very careful about my motives. Now, point number 4 is about our modern relationship with work. And the idea here is that our modern relationship with work is quite extrinsic rather than intrinsic. We often view work as a means to an end. Whereas what philosopher Andrew Taggart says is that if we're actually optimizing for meaning and fulfillment, those things don't come from chasing external metrics of success. Those things come instead from treating our work like a craft and treating it as an end in itself, as a form of creative expression. And so if you can view your work in this way, you can view it where you value the work for its own sake, rather than being a extrinsically motivated kind of striving for some kind of reward, then you're way more likely to find meaning and fulfillment in that work. Now, one thing that Paul talks a lot about in the book is the idea of traveling and doing the digital nomad life if you're into that sort of thing. And actually, one of the tools that's really helped me when I've been traveling is in fact Surfshark VPN, who are very kindly sponsoring this video. And there were a couple of areas of my life in which I really appreciated having a VPN. The first one is if I'm trying to download scientific papers, academic papers from Sci-Hub, for example, super helpful having a VPN to mask my internet traffic to get around any blocks or any filters, anything like that. And secondly, when I'm traveling, often in different countries, they will just randomly block different sites, or like hotel Wi-Fi's won't allow you to access certain types of site. Reddit is often banned in some of these Wi-Fi networks. And so being able to connect through a VPN, which kind of anonymizes and masks your traffic and encrypts it, means that A, no one can snoop what you're doing on the internet, but B, it allows you to get around those sorts of filters. And I'm going to be honest, so Surfshark actually reached out over a year ago and then wanted to sponsor some videos. But at the time I said no, because I honestly didn't use a VPN at the time. But since then, I've actually been using Surfshark VPN for all of these different use cases. And so we reached back out to them and said, hey guys, would you be interested in sponsoring this video? And they very kindly said yes. And they very kindly offered an exclusive discount for our viewers as well. And so if you go to surfshark.deals/Abdaal, which will be linked down below as well, and you enter the promo code Abdaal at checkout, that will give you 83% off the subscription and also 3 months of free access to Surfshark VPN. There is a totally risk-free 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you can try it out, and if you don't like it, you literally get your money back. It's completely risk-free. So check out the link in the video description, and thank you Surfshark for sponsoring this video. All right, so idea number 5 is the challenge that we all have in overcoming our ought to self. This is essentially about the ought to, or the should voice in our heads. I should do this. I ought to do that. And on one hand, this voice is clearly a good thing because it helps us follow through on our commitments. But on the other hand, this should attitude can stop us from making important changes to our life. Like, I should keep working a full-time job. It would be weird if I didn't work 40 hours a week at least. I should stay in medicine because it's the more prestigious thing to do. It's the thing that's more worthwhile for society. Even if it doesn't particularly fulfill me, I should do it because I've spent all this time in training. I've sunk 6 years into it, whatever that might be. And there's that quote that goes something along the lines of, shoulding yourself too often leads to a shitty life. And the cool thing about this concept is that we don't have to eliminate all of the shoulds or ought tos from our life, but it does mean that we should recognize their power. And that means that if you do take a risk, like if, for example, you start a business and for whatever reason, things further down the line, things don't work out, your should self is going to be so powerful that it's going to help you get out of that mess. Now, idea number 6 is the fear setting exercise. Now, this is actually from Tim Ferriss's book, The 4-Hour Workweek. And, Paul talks about the exercise in this book here. And the idea here is that these are just 7 simple journaling prompts. This does not take hours to go through. You can even just spend a few minutes thinking about it. But if you genuinely answer these 7 questions for yourself, chances are you will make a significant difference in your life. Now, this exercise has helped me so many times. Whenever I feel like I'm in a crossroads in life, I literally just type it on Google, fear setting, Tim Ferriss. I go on his blog, I read through the exercise, and I just do it. And I spend like half an hour journaling through that. And usually I'm like, oh damn, the fears and stuff that I was saying in my head are way overblown out of proportion. Yes, the worst case scenario is pretty bad, but like, it's not even that bad. And I could probably mitigate against the worst case scenario if I really wanted to. So I'll put a link to Tim Ferriss's blog post down in the video description. 100% recommend bookmarking out of this thing. All right, we've got 4 more things to talk about, but I'm just about to head to date night with the girlfriend, lol. So I will see you back later. All right, it's a new day, and we're talking about point number 7 from the book, which is the idea of sabbaticals. Now, this whole idea of potentially like quitting your job and doing your own thing is probably out of reach for most people, but what is in reach for a lot of people is taking a sabbatical, i.e. a planned break from work. He says, firstly, people become aware of their own suffering. And really, when you're entrenched in work, especially if you're doing a job that's like, okay, it's reasonable, it pays the bills, you maybe don't enjoy it so much, but like, it's totally fine. You kind of convince yourself that that existence is totally okay, and then you take a sabbatical and you realize, oh, hang on. The fact that I've now got space away from work has made me aware of like how much I didn't enjoy my job. Secondly, when you take a sabbatical, curiosity re-emerges. When you have more spare time on your hands, and I've got a few friends who are now on sabbaticals from work, and for the first few weeks they were like, damn, I get to play video games and stuff. And then after a couple of weeks, they're like, okay, cool. I want to dive into this kind of project or that project. I want to really get into coding artificial intelligence stuff. And thirdly, after a sabbatical, people often want to continue their non-work journey. There are some people that take a sabbatical that are like, cool, I've decided on my sabbatical that, now that I had time to think, that actually the thing I was doing for my job and my career was in fact very fulfilling, and they dive straight back into it. But that's unusual. Mostly when people take a sabbatical, and this was certainly the case for me, you realize, after reflecting quite a lot, that actually, hang on, how do I really want to spend my life? Like, what are my core values? What are the things that are meaningful and fulfilling to me? And then often that means that, you change your approach to work so that you don't just dive back into that corporate ladder or whatever greasy pole you were climbing before your sabbatical. And the way I think of it these days is like, if you take a mini holiday from work, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks, maybe longer than that if you possibly can, do you return to work feeling excited to get back to work? Or do you return to work with a sense of dread, feeling like, oh God, I can't believe I have to do this again? By the way, if you enjoy videos like this, you might like to check out Sunday Snippets. That is a weekly email that I send every Sunday and just has a few thoughts of the week, along with some thoughts from books or quotes from books that I've read recently. And that's more of a real time kind of what's going on in my mind, what am I learning and what am I reading? And I share that with so far like 200,000 people on this weekly Sunday email. It's completely free. You can unsubscribe anytime, and that'll be linked down below, or aliabdaal.com/Sunday if you want to check that out. All right, point number 8 is about experiments in living. And in 1859, John Stuart Mill wrote a book on liberty, and he writes that the worth of different modes of life should be proved practically when anyone thinks fit to try them. In which basically he argues that societies need people to embrace their own individuality and to conduct experiments in living. There are so many different ways of living. The whole wake up at 7, go to your 9-to-5 job, get home, watch TV, get married, get a house, like all of that kind of stuff in a kind of first world country. That's like one mode of living, but there are so many other modes of living. What would it be like to live in a van? What could it be like to live in a cabin in the woods in the mountains? What could it be like to spend a year traveling the world and like going doing the digital nomad thing? And really the way I think of it for myself is, if I even have a vague curiosity of, I wonder what it would be like to live in this sort of way, it's worth running the experiment. It's worth trying it out for a week or even a few days or maybe a month and just seeing whether my theory, whether my hypothesis holds true. All right, point number 9 is a really nice quote from Amos Tversky, where he says, the secret to doing good research is to always be a little underemployed. You waste years by not being able to waste hours. I don't take this advice to heart myself because I feel like my days are currently so chock-a-block with stuff, but I know that that's suboptimal. I know that I should have like more empty space, more white space in my calendar to be able to think more creatively and to be able to actually think. I'm always like doing something and trying to get more leverage on my time. And like, okay, we're going to film this video, then we're going to go to WeWork, then we're going to do some book stuff, then we're going to do this, then we've got a session here, we're going to go gym there. And I just don't allow the white space to happen in my calendar. Certainly one thing I'd like to do more of, and that this book is encouraging me to do, is to actually just not be so like on the hamster wheel of capitalism to try and churn out more and more videos to appease more and more sponsors and like make sure that every unit of my time is best spent maximally optimizing for economic output. And then finally, the thing that I really took away from this book: when you're on a pathless path, instead of being afraid or being concerned about the fact that your path is uncertain and that you don't know where you're going to be 5 years from now or 10 years from now, you can instead approach it with curiosity and wonder. I wonder what my career is going to look like 5 years from now. Let's see. Let's see what happens, and we'll work towards it in a way that's enjoyable and sustainable, hopefully, and a correct course along the way. And as long as I'm operating from that place of curiosity and wonder, then I trust that the financial stuff will take care of itself, or that something interesting will come about, because I'm operating from a place of curiosity and wonder rather than from a place of fear. So The Pathless Path was one of the most impactful books that I read last year. And if you want a list of the other 14 books that I really vibe with that I think you could read this year, then check out this video over here, and that will have a few more summaries. And you can see if you have any books, if there are any books in there that take your fancy. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you hopefully in the next video. Bye-bye.